Incessant rain battered Delhi and Gurgaon, which is metropolitan city. Now you could see MNCs and expensive shopping complexes, shopping malls, residential areas, and then ravaging floodwaters that drowned and inundated Delhi and Gurgaon. Same is the case with every monsoon with cities like Mumbai, Bengaluru, and Chennai. And there is other added problem, which is water shortage. Every heat every summer, these cities again face challenges related to groundwater depletion, shortage of drinking water, scarcity of water in Chennai, Bengaluru, and Mumbai. And Delhi is even worse when it comes to air pollution. You cannot breathe fresh air during winter. So, in this context, I'm trying to understand which city is whether or not ready to withstand climate change crisis in India. And that's what we'll analyze in this video. Indian cities are growing faster than their ability and capacity to cope with a changing climate. Now, the problem is not that the climate risks are unknown. Heat waves, flooding water, water shortage, water scarcity, extreme rainfall, and pollution are already visible. The problem is that urban infrastructure and planning have largely been designed for yesterday's climate and yesterday's society. The scale of the challenge is enormous. India's urban population is projected to almost double from 480 million in 2020 to 951 million by 2050. At the same time, more than half of the infrastructure that India will need for 2050 has yet to be built. Now, this gives India an opportunity to build differently, but also means that the decisions being made today will lock cities into climate risks for decades. Now, the World Bank estimates that Indian cities will need more than 2.4 trillion by 2050 for a new resilient and low carbon infrastructure and services. Now, the fundamental problem is urbanization without sufficient climate risk planning. The 2025 World Bank report warns that intense heat and urban heat island effects are already pushing city center temperatures more than 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above surrounding areas. Now, in other words, cities are replacing natural systems, open land, vegetation, wetlands, and drainage channels with buildings, roads, and concrete. And climate change is making the underlying weather more extreme. A new IIT Roorkee study reported in August 2026 projects that India's monsoon could increasingly deliver more rainfall in fewer but much heavier downpours, increasing the risk of flash flooding and giving cities less time to respond. Now, this simply means just a few hours of heavy rainfall can inundate our metro cities badly. Heavy rainfall during monsoon season has proven that extreme rainfall can overwhelm even engineered infrastructure. For example, Gurgaon, which boasts of having multiple corporate houses, MNCs, modern complexes, shopping malls, and residential areas, gets fully inundated during heavy rain. Now, the problem becomes worse when wetlands, lakes, floodplains, and natural drainage channels are built over. Research and policy analysis on Indian urban flooding has repeatedly identified unplanned development and the neglect of cities' relationships with water bodies, floodplains, and catchment areas as major vulnerabilities. The World Bank estimates that timely adaptation could avert around $5 billion in annual pluvial flood losses by 2030, rising to about $30 billion by 2070. Cities are not prepared for extreme heat and weather events. Now let's understand with the data. Most of our cities are not prepared for heat. During the May 2026 heat wave, temperatures across northwest and central India reached 40 to 40 degrees Celsius, with some locations touching even 48 and 50 degrees Celsius. Every year, hundreds died due to heat wave, heat stroke, shortage of water, and what not. A person working outdoors cannot escape a 45 degrees Celsius afternoon by staying indoors like you and me. A low-income household may not even have air conditioning. A street vendor cannot simply stop working during a heat wave. A family living in a flood-prone settlement may have no financial cushion to recover after losing its home or possessions. The World Bank estimates that timely adaptation could save more than 130,000 lives from extreme heat impacts by 2050. Now, this figure demonstrates that climate adaptation isn't merely an infrastructure issue, it is a public health issue. Besides this, you must have noticed that the problem is getting even worse during night. The International Energy Agency reports that nighttime temperatures in India are rising twice as fast as daytime temperatures. India's peak electricity demand reached a record 270 gigawatt on May 21st, 2026, compared with about 180 gigawatt in 2019. Water systems are again increasingly vulnerable. Climate resilience is all about having water when the rain isn't falling. Bengaluru's 2024 water crisis showed how quickly urban water insecurity can become an economic and social crisis. Now, groundwater levels fell, the Kaveri Basin came under pressure, and tanker prices rose sharply. Rapid urban development and the loss of water bodies and green cover had also reduced groundwater discharge. Now, this happens in cities like Delhi, Chennai, and Mumbai, and this is an annual affair. Cities like Delhi, Chennai, and Mumbai also report water shortages and water scarcity and witness groundwater depletion every year. This exposes a fundamental weakness in many Indian cities: water supply and groundwater mismanagement, land use planning, and climate adaptation are often treated as separate issues when they are actually connected. A city can experience devastating floods during the peak monsoon season and severe water shortage months later during summer. The problem isn't simply the amount of rainfall, it is the city's ability to capture, store, recharge, and reuse it. We miserably fail at it, as evident. What we need to do is respond and redesign our cities instead of reacting with unplanned urbanization in the context of climate change. The bigger problem is that climate adaptation often remains a separate program rather than becoming the foundation of urban development. The World Bank's conclusion is particularly important. It says that India has a critical opportunity right now because more than 50% of the urban infrastructure required for 2050 has not yet been built. Now, that means India's climate problem is also an opportunity in disguise. The country can still build cities around trees rather than just concrete, public transport than private cars, water retention rather than rapid drainage, passive cooling rather than endless air conditioning, and resilient infrastructure rather than repeated disaster repair. Because the question facing Indian cities is no longer whether climate change will affect them, it already is. The question is whether India will continue adapting its cities after every disaster or redesign them before the next one arrives. To understand more such issues about how climate impacts us and our economy, subscribe to Sustainability Adda.